All right, everyone. Hello, my name is Lauren Amundsen. As Ryan said, I'm the librarian and archivist at Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff. And I'm just going to spend some time today talking about the three collections that we have on the Arizona Memory Project. Um, so, to give you just a brief background of the observatory, Percival Lowell was a wealthy Boston mathematician who became very interested in astronomy and especially the study of Mars in the 1890s. And so he established an observatory here in Flagstaff, and we're still around today doing research and outreach. And my role is to collect and preserve all of that research that we do here. So our collections go back pretty much to our founding in 1894. Um, so our first collection, we published in 2012. And I can't honestly remember how we became aware of AMP at that time. But we didn't really have a good platform for putting our collections online. And so we connected and I said, hey, I just like to do kind of a small collection of some of the highlights. So this was the first one. We just called it Selections from the Lowell Archives. A lot of images, sort of some early photos of people, telescopes, that kind of thing. Um, this is kind of cool. Percival, he believed there were intelligent beings on Mars that were building canals to move water from the poles to the rest of the planet. And so he would make these really detailed drawings of the planet Mars, which obviously we now know that that's not correct. But for him, that was kind of what he thought and what he put out there to the public. Our other claim to fame in 1930, a young, not even a trained astronomer, but a young guy from Kansas named Clyde Tombaugh came out to Flagstaff, was hired by the observatory, and he ended up discovering Pluto. So that's kind of one of our other claims to fame is that we are the place that discovered Pluto in 1930. And we still really celebrate that today. So here's some shots of Clyde at the telescope, and then at this machine called a blink comparator that he used, where he actually went up to the telescope. He would use 14 by 17-inch glass plate negatives. He would get exposures over about a 6 hour period. Then he'd have to take those back to a dark room. And he used this machine called a blink comparator, where he would have these plates mounted side by side, and it would actually blink light back and forth. And so anything moving on those plates, you would know was not a star because it was much closer relative to our view on Earth. And that's how he discovered tiny little Pluto. And we still have those plates in our collection. So those are some of the things we wanted to highlight. Here's another, this is one of my favorites, a color drawing of Mars. Um, and then this is Percival Lowell's widow, Constance. This is a fascinating photo because Percival died in 1916, and his widow, every photo that I ever saw of her, she was always wearing black after his death. And one of my volunteers was going through some photos that hadn't been processed, and he said, "Look at these. She's wearing white. Here she is at Lowell's mausoleum." So that was kind of an interesting little discovery for us. And then this is our newest telescope, the Discovery Channel telescope. This is located in Happy Jack, which is about 45 miles southeast of Flagstaff. This is our 4.3-meter telescope that our astronomers use for current research. Um, and then some audio files as well, some meetings, um, old tapes that we had digitized, and then various letters and things like that. Scrapbooks. Rexy Leonard was Percival Lowell's assistant, and she had these great scrapbooks from the like 1870s. So we digitized those and put them up here as well. Mars maps that Percival Lowell made. Again, these are very popular with researchers who want to see what Lowell was doing. So a lot of that kind of stuff, the last observation notes that he made the night before he died in 1916. Again, that was a different volunteer who was just going through a box of stuff in the basement and found these. And so immediately we were like, hey, let's get those digitized. So just again, that was sort of I guess, the highlights. And then in 2015, NASA had a mission called New Horizons, where they did a flyby of the planet Pluto because we had never had anything close enough to get really good photos. And I don't know if any of you remember that, but it was amazing. The first photos that the mission sent back were just fantastic. So knowing that that was going to happen in July of 2015, we said, "Hey, we really want to do a collection highlighting." We were marketing it here at Lowell as the Year of Pluto, and so we just started digitizing various items in our Pluto collection, having to do with the announcement of the planet when it was discovered in 1930. A lot of really cool stuff that we got at the time was letters from the public that were suggesting different names for the planet, completely unsolicited by the observatory. But people would send in, suggestions wanting to name it after their kid or, Greek and Roman gods and that kind of thing. That ended up being called Pluto based on a letter from a little girl in England who was 11 years old, and she was the first one to suggest it. So that's a lot of our Pluto collection, various people that had a role in that, and things that came along as part of the celebration that year. And again, we just really wanted to um, highlight that whole process because there was a lot going on that year up here in terms of the flyby and the celebration. So again, a lot of letters. I think a friend of or a colleague of mine and I, we wrote an article for Astronomy Magazine, and we tallied all the different names, and I can't even remember, but it was hundreds of different names. So that was kind of cool, something that we wanted to share with people. And then the last collection we did was in 2019. We called it Flagstaff It Is, and that was celebrating the 125th anniversary of the founding of the observatory. And so the focus of this was so when Percival Lowell decided that he wanted to build an observatory in what was then the Arizona Territory, he sent a guy named Andrew Douglas out to Arizona to find a site for the observatory. You might be familiar with the name Andrew Douglas. He ended up down at U of A in Tucson, and he founded dendrochronology, which is the study of tree rings and using tree rings to date the age of trees and study climate and that type of thing. But back in 1894, Douglas came out here and he went to Tombstone, Tucson, Tempe, Prescott, and Flagstaff. And he had a telescope with him, and he would do site testing at each place. And then he would send reports back to Percival Lowell, who was in Boston. And so we thought, wouldn't it be great to digitize all of the letters and telegrams back and forth between the two of them? Sometimes there were multiple letters per day, just following that entire conversation of how they finally selected Flagstaff as the site. And so you can see just, the detail. I mean, Douglas would report back on not only like the conditions for seeing, but he would talk about the people in the town and available amenities and all kinds of stuff like that. So he just really wanted to give Lowell a complete report of each place. So we digitized all of those letters, a lot of these, old telegrams and things like that. And we called it Flagstaff It Is, and I think it's in this one, but I can't remember. Nope. But there was one letter in particular where Douglas had been sending these letters back to Percival Lowell, and I guess from Flagstaff, Lowell decided that was it. And so in one of these letters, he just said, Flagstaff It Is. And we thought, hey, that's a great title for a collection. So Ended up doing that. And I think I can't remember at what point in 2019 we published this, but AMP was really great about marketing it and saying, hey, this is something that, we've done for our anniversary. Lots of these postcards and things like that. Um, and so yeah, that was just a really cool way for us to kind of publicize what we were doing at the time. And because a lot of these letters were handwritten, after the fact, I had one of my volunteers go back and do the transcriptions for the handwritten letters. Let me see if I can find an example. Because, we wanted to make them accessible, and we could probably use AI to do that now, but I think um, yeah, for some of these, we had her go back in and do transcriptions, which wasn't always easy. But we just figured that would be a good way to let people experience the full document. So that is all I have for that. I just want to thank Ryan for being so supportive with everything that we've done, in terms of getting our digital materials available online. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Lauren, I would love to know that little girl who named Pluto. What was it about her letter, or why did they choose Pluto?
Yeah, so her name was Venetia Burney, and the story is that she was having breakfast with her grandfather one day in England, and she saw the newspaper story about the discovery, and she said, "Well, I think Pluto would be a good name because it's the god of the underworld, and Pluto's way out at the edge of the solar system." And so her grandfather actually knew, I think it was an astronomer or a scientist in England, and he was the one who sent the telegram to us and said, this suggestion comes from a little girl in England. And hers was not the only suggestion for Pluto, but it was the first one that they received here at the observatory. So that would have been, so the discovery was announced on March 13th of 1930. Her telegram came in just a couple days later, and then May 1st was when they made the announcement of the name. And what was interesting back then is that the folks here at Lowell got to decide on that name anymore. It has to go through a whole process with, probably the International Astronomical Union deciding names. But back then, it was just the people at Lowell, and they gave Venetia the credit because they said she's the first one that we got. So, and what's really cool is that years later, she ended up corresponding with my predecessor, who was the archivist here. And so we have some letters from her later on as an adult, which is kind of cool.
Awesome.
Sure. Were there astronomy specific topics or at least astronomy adjacent topics that town halls have sort of covered? Just anything broadly related to solving, it's all about solving problems. I guess there's any times when sort of space exploration sort of came in because I know like a lot of, different inventions and stuff were byproducts of figuring out how to get to space and that kind of stuff.
That's a great question because, for the most part, no. I think people get very focused on, unless you're Lauren, right? Get very focused on what's here on my planet in front of me. The only time we've come close to that, in recent years, uh, we have people who hire us to come and facilitate discussions for them. And it was actually in Flagstaff. There's a group, Night Sky or something like that. I'm getting it wrong, but who are very interested in keeping the skies dark at night so that you can see the stars. And we helped facilitate some discussion about how to manage that for them, how governments can manage that as you have growth and economy. But that's it for the most part. I mean, if you look at our reports, it's some of the same stuff over and over again. The economy, water, transportation, stuff on this planet. Um, yeah.
Interesting. And then Lauren, I know that Pluto was sort of demoted to a dwarf planet. So I guess how has I guess Lowell Observatory sort of adapted to sort of a official scientific conclusion. But Pluto's, I'm sure, still a real planet, quote unquote, in everyone's hearts kind of thing. So I guess how did the observatory sort of adapt to that kind of official scientific change and what's considered a planet?
Yeah, I think at first, so that happened in 2006. I think at first there was a lot of, anger, like, how can you guys do something like that? But the more we talk about it, the more we say, doesn't really matter what you call it. And especially when they did the New Horizons flyby, because that was, everybody loves Pluto. Most people will say there's sort of two camps. It's still a planet, or there's people like, I don't care. Like, I just, I think it's cool. The story is cool. It's very tied into to us as an observatory. And I think it was about 5 years ago we started doing something in February called the I Heart Pluto Festival. And that's really grown up here. And we get people from honestly all over the world who come to just celebrate Pluto. So I think for a while there was some disappointment in that decision, and especially the way that it happened. But for us, and we got letters from school kids that were like, "Oh, we still think it's a planet," and I feel like we got a lot of support from people who didn't really buy into that whole thing. So from our perspective, it's like, hey, it was still discovered here. Um, and we just, we continue to celebrate that for sure. But it is still a planet.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. I remember once I was visiting and they had, I think it was like a couple of like donation, like sort of like boxes, like sort of in the front lobby. And it was like, is Pluto a planet? Yes, no. And then either way, like people could vote with their money and say like, yep, this is, yeah, it's still a
Yep.
planet. And I think that one was overstuffed and the other one didn't have much in it. So,
Yep. Oh yeah, that was pretty popular.